and going from there. So,
All right, I'm streaming.
good job.
Doing a stream.
I don't have any notifications for Connor up yet, but I'm sure you're working on it.
Working on it.
Update titles.
What is going on, everybody? We've got one hell of an episode rigged up for you guys today. First, let's introduce our wonderful team because we got a very special guest today. First, our good friend Connor Points. You can find him on YouTube as Counterpoints with 27,000 subscribers over there, kicking ass and taking names, bringing a lot of wonderful content, particularly with Warhammer and a former law enforcement and police, law enforcement and military experience. So yeah, Connor, if you want to give yourself a quick intro, I'd really appreciate it.
Yeah, sure. My name's Connor. I'm a centrist, but I piss everybody off all of the time. So that's kind of what I do in the political debate sphere. And then I do talk about Warhammer, law enforcement, military stuff, and politics in general. So if you're into any of that stuff, come check it out. We're doing pretty gosh darn good, and good to be back.
All right, fantastic. Next, you can find him over at Crowdsource Politics. It is our good friend Cypher, bringing in a little bit of that left-wing perspective for us. It's good to have you here as well, sir.
I'll be trying to represent the good old left-ish position on this program. So if you don't know me, my name is Cypher. I run a podcast called Crowdsource Politics, and in that podcast, we do a bunch of different things. We explore different sides of political spectrum, cultural issues, and especially geopolitical issues with Cypher State. So we have a couple of shows. Go ahead and check us up on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast stream from. Thank you again, Tiberius, for having me on.
Hey, always a pleasure to have you over here. Next, our special guest for this evening, he is Carl Emmerich. Is Emmerich? How do we say that?
Emmerich, yeah, like it's a K.
Okay, I thought it was that, but I wanted to make sure. Carl Emmerich from TikTok, sporting 114,000 followers over there. Probably the biggest celebrity guest that we've actually had on when it comes to numbers. So we definitely appreciate you having here. Go ahead and let all the audience know where you come from and what you do, sir.
What's up, guys? Yeah, so I guess I started on TikTok. I also have like a YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, all that stuff. But TikTok's kind of my main platform. I talk primarily about politics, and kind of the main thing I do is like live stream debates where I have like long form discussions with people, and hopefully we're going to have one of those tonight.
He had a wonderful episode I was listening into, I believe it was Friday, where you were talking with a lawyer. And usually you'll talk to people for about 20 minutes and roll them out. This guy you engaged with for, I'd say, about an hour and a half, and it was high quality stuff. I really enjoyed that one a lot.
Yeah, that guy was really fun. Yeah,
that was great. And Bake Cupcake, my girlfriend likes to give you a shout out because she's a fan favorite of yours. So she was very happy to see you here on the show. Next, the PC pimp Osiris is in the house. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing good. How's everybody else doing? I haven't seen you in a long time. I feel like our family's falling apart. Y'all get this shit together, okay?
Bring the boys back home, right? And then, of course, I am Tiberius D. I'm a geopolitical analyst that basically runs my own company, talk about what's going on in the wider world and why everyone should be screaming because the house is on fire. But, we'll definitely be talking about that here in the coming episode. So, with introductions out of the way, of course, you guys know how it works. You largely bring your own topic. We're going to kick it off with Carl first because he is the guest today. I know we have a bit of a pre-arranged topic if he wants to get into that, but you can also talk about just any kind of thing that's on your mind. That's usually how this particular show works.
Awesome. I mean, I don't know. I didn't know I would be bringing the topic. What do you guys want to I believe you said you wanted to talk about like American Empire. That was kind of the premise of today's discussion.
That's the preloaded. Yeah, that's the preloaded topic. That is the preloaded topic, just in case we need to go with it. But also, it's just like, hey, man, is there anything in the news that is just like, wow, this was a serious thing. People need to talk about it more. Or, you just want to throw out your 10 cents on it.
I mean, that's a big. Obviously, the Ukrainian kind of counteroffensive seems to be going well. They seem to be reclaiming as much territory as they can before the really, really harsh winter months come. It's kind of with the fog of war, it's kind of hard to get a super accurate idea of what's going on. And it sounds like, from what I was reading today, there's some pretty bad atrocities in Izium that they're kind of discovering, similar to what they were discovering in like Bucha at the time. So it's hopefully going as good as could be hoped for Ukraine right now. So I don't know what you guys think about that.
Yeah, actually, I can piggyback off of that because of something that I watched today. I actually watched a video breakdown of the HIMARS mobile artillery rocket system that's supposed to be like super advantageous for Ukraine right now. And it could just be propaganda. I don't know. It was just like a little infographic show thing. But basically, what their contention was that like Ukraine's been roughing it for a long time. Americans and Western European allies have provided them with super accurate artillery that is now technically more, it's more accurate and longer distance than the Russian artillery. As a result, they've basically been sniping the supply depots and command infrastructure of the Russians, forcing the Russians to push their logistics back further behind the lines. And then what's happening is you're having all these logistics breakdowns for the Russian front line that then in turn got exploited by Ukrainian infantry. So I don't know how much of this is like just Western media bullshit or Lockheed Martin propaganda or anything like that. But I do think it's interesting that there was a lot of like neutral Russian, I say pro-Russian pundits in the beginning who were like, "Why are you cheering on Ukraine? They're going to be getting stomped on? It's a fantasy to think that they can do anything." And now we're looking at a Ukrainian counteroffensive. It's wild.
I think so.
Go ahead,
sorry, no. I was just gonna say, I was wondering if any of you had seen this. I'd seen a few people passively say that, like in the past, like kind of few weeks, the Ukrainians have claimed more weapons from Russia than the entirety that the West has sent them over the course of this war. Have you guys heard anyone say something similar to that? Because, like I said, I've heard people passively mention that, but I haven't actually seen any like numbers surrounding that.
It's true, but there's a problem. It's all junk.
Exactly. Okay.
Okay. So I've got three things I want to hit with this, and I've done two videos this week, largely talking about what the offensive was, how we got there, and moreover what the final end product was. And now we're actually seeing a number of wars in the Russian periphery start firing off. Georgia is openly having a conversation about having a referendum on if they're going to declare war on the Russians, just to provide a second front. Kyrgyzstan, no, I'm serious. Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan are openly been in 3 days of border skirmishes where they've been shooting at each other. So, yeah, fun. And, of course, Armenia and Azerbaijan have started their conflicts again. So, hooray! The entire Russian sphere is literally catching on fire. And there's still murmurs that Romania and Moldova is going to double team up on Transnistria, which is a secessionist province in Moldova. And the murmurs out of the Middle East is that Israel is now very much eyeing on taking out Assad because the Russians aren't there to defend him anymore. So lots of things going on. Lots of things going on right now.
Wasn't this supposed to be a period of like Russian expansionism? Wasn't the whole point to like reassert the Russian Empire? And now you basically have like it. For me, it kind of reminds me of when somebody thinks that they're a lot tougher than they are. You know, I used to be a cop. I know all these kinds of people. So like, you know, people think they're tougher than they are. Then they actually write a check that their ass can't cash, and then they find out really quick that they bet too much. That's kind of what it feels like, because I almost feel like we all overestimated the Russians.
I want to break that down real quick. So there's three things that really went into this counteroffensive. Number one is that the Ukrainians pulled a bit of a feint. Everything that they were saying was they were going after Kherson. And the Russians moved basically the best or the better part of their units into the Kherson region to defend it. They probably overextended their supply lines, but they pulled a couple of infantry advances up against the border or against the river there just to kind of convince the Russians it was real. And then all of a sudden we saw an entire basically mechanized division roll out of northern Kharkov and go up north of Izium, and they encircled the area or threatened to encircle it, and an entire two Russian combined arms armies, which are basically two American divisions, just pulled the fuck out. And so you've seen the better part of, I believe it was 8,000 square kilometers have been recaptured by the Ukrainians in a mechanized offensive.
But is this so this is where my skeptic brain gets flipped on a little bit, because I don't a lot of the Ukrainian stuff has been propaganda, and I'm not saying that's like a bad thing. Propaganda is it's a weapon in war. Psychology and mentality and you know, all that kind of stuff. These are all important things. So I'm not trying to dog it. But what I am saying is, like, if I understand the lower end of Russian goals, it's to retain Donetsk and Luhansk and Crimea. And do they actually care about the northeastern breakout? And so on one hand, I want to be skeptical and say, oh, they don't care as much, so they're withdrawing. But then the counter evidence that I have is they lost a shitload of weapons, a shitload of tanks. They've lost troops. They've lost all this material, and they've lost all these logistics supply lines. So if they were saying, okay, it's cool, you can have that, that's not that important to us anyways, you feel like the retreat would have been a little bit more ordered than at least we're seeing online.
Yeah, the retreat seemed to be completely, like you said, disordered. They broke their lines. They pulled back further than they were expecting. There was people that got cut off in that retreat. From what I understand, people were just like, they basically like circled off and they came around like one way and like stopped them from retreating because they were the lines were broken and all that stuff. So if Russia cared, if Russia didn't care, then they still have a shit command and control perspective of this. Their generals are just absolute dog shit. They're ran by a bunch of dipshits at this point, and we can't assume that they're like paper tiger, right? Sorry. They're like just a giant paper tiger.
Sorry, one more wild thing to say to throw the wrench out there. The other thing was apparently a lot of Russian comms are unsecured. So they're literally just rolling around with like dime store walkie-talkies, basically transmitting tactical and strategic information through stuff that you can buy at Radio Shack. And I'm just thinking to myself, it's like, guys, like if you have unsecured comms and you're broadcasting what you're doing and you're facing a modern military, you're fucked. Like your signals intelligence is just going right into the enemy hands. What are you talking? Like, how is this our rival? That's kind of my question.
It's even funnier than that. So that true, but it's even funnier than that. We had people in Russian command, or not high level command, but maybe lower level command, what we would consider the NCO Corps in the United States. They don't have very much power. It's all fucking top down bullshit. The NCO makes the backbone of the US military, but not of the Russian military. However, these people were also getting catfished on fucking Tinder and other groups, revealing positions and other things like that, and using that data, because the data is apparently being shared, I guess.
Send me a dick pic, but also get the hills in the background.
Yeah, get the hills in the background.
Is this for real?
Yes, 100% for real.
So just as a funny here real quick, literally this is the way the Russians lost the Battle of Tannenberg all the way back in 1914, is that literally everything that was over the early source radios was openly transmitted, and the Germans were like, oh, so that's what the Russians are gonna do. Pincer movement, kicks their teeth in, literally in World War I. So it's funny, like literally what's old is new again, because the Russians just don't learn their lesson. But just to add clarity here into what we saw, the mechanized offensive didn't really like surprise me too much. It was the area that is north of Kharkov, where a lot of the open spaces still were that were taken as part of the counteroffensive, was literally Ukrainian infantry going up against mechanized units. These are literally guys who at best have trucks, big, 2.5 ton trucks that they're going to be shipped in on. They don't have mechanized weapons like, armored personnel carriers. They're going up against the Russians who do. And the Russians cut and ran. Either one, they don't have the ability to fight. Two, they don't have the manpower to fight. Or three, they don't have the supplies to fight, and they are openly running from the field of battle.
Well, I think that we're also, we mentioned kind of the propaganda before, maybe potential propaganda that Ukraine's putting out. But I think also what's not being, we've heard a little bit about it, is the way Russia sold this to their own population. They didn't say, they still don't call it a war. This is a special military operation to stop a genocide in Donetsk and Lugansk. And I think a lot of these, these rank and file, military guys on the Russian side came in thinking they're going to be welcomed as, liberators. And then when they're actually meeting, a pushback, I think some of that. I think that's part of why we're seeing some of these lines fall apart so quickly.
Oh, for sure.
There's definitely been a level of that. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say one of the echoes that you just brought up that I've just been like shocked by, like every time when I scroll on Twitter, I've just been totally shocked by, is I feel like I'm watching a early 20th century army, like with like mid 20th century technology, facing off against like a modern military with modern technology and modern tactics. Like I've made this quip before, but it's like we're watching like GPS guided maneuver warfare against like old school attrition warfare from like World War II. And it's like the Russians, like they're not fighting like anything I've seen in the past like 30 years. They're literally lining up in perimeters, using artillery to screening their advance, blowing everything up before they even get there, and then advancing into the area that they just blew up. And that's like a really slow, methodical way of fighting. Whereas what the United States military has been practicing for, I think, the better part of like 50 years is maneuver warfare, where you don't go where the enemy is strongest. You hit them where they're weakest. You disorient them. You basically get around their lines. You hit their weaker checkpoints. You do all that kind of stuff. And then the defenders are left to decide, do you continue to defend a strong point that's now cut off from the rest of your army, or do you try to fight out of the encirclement? And so there's all these kinds of things. And one of the quotes that popped into my head while you were talking was they were talking about like the different kinds of warfare that each country's practiced, and the Germans were describing American warfare, and they were like, we don't know what the Americans do because the Americans don't even know what the Americans are doing.
Sounds like America to me.
Yeah. There's a long story short here, and I actually have done a little bit of a video on this one. I've actually talked about it on the show about the evolution of the doctrines. And basically coming out of World War II, there was 3 doctrines. One was mobile warfare doctrine. This is what the Germans were trying to get to, but they wanted a fully mobilized army. They never got that. Remind you that the German army still relied on 600,000 horses in World War II. The United States and the Allies did what we call superior firepower doctrine, which is you can have a line, you can have 4 dudes here and 4 dudes against you, but you take all 4 of your dudes and you shoot one of them. It's literally just unloading on one entire presence to demoralize the guys around him, but more also in point is that you are trying to eliminate a target with superior firepower. So that's what the Americans and the Allies did. And then the Russians had what we largely call mass mobilization, which is not just human wave, but it's literally, hey, I have 10,000 pieces of artillery. I don't need to superior firepower one piece of the line. I can wipe out the entire line all at one time. And so literally it's superior numbers and firepower when it comes to just a general ordnance. So you fire in with the artillery, you come in with the armored vehicles, and you follow up with an infantry advance. The difference
that
between
doesn't work with modern weapons.
It doesn't.
Well, here's the thing. There's 2 major things here that are a major concern. Number one, the Americans, in particularly the last 20 years, have emphasized what we call fire maneuver, where they have taken superior fire doctrine and they've taken mobile warfare and they've tried to meld them. And so far, looks like we're getting pretty good at that. The Russians, in theory, should still be able to use their doctrine, but their equipment is dog shit. We're coming to find out that these T-90 tanks and T-80 tanks that were the bane of our existence, that we thought were going to be an equal fight against like the M1 Abrams, literally is not being maintained. Their era armor, the explosive reactive armor, is full of rubber. So even if it was supposed to be the top line stuff, they clearly aren't putting in the work and the effort into actually making their force combat effective.
This is okay, but this is like the equivalent. What's blowing my mind about this is like this is the equivalent of my father-in-law and some of my uncles who buy like 50,000 rounds for the apocalypse, and then they leave it in like a non-humidity protected like shed in their backyard, and then everything gets like rusted and corroded. But instead, extrapolate that example out onto a supposedly pure military, and that's what I see when I see the depots of like equipment. Like Americans, our logistics supply chains are pretty amazing, and we do leave a lot of stuff out to rot. But what I was surprised by is I've seen abandoned warehouses that were abandoned for 5 or 10 years, and the the active Russian supply depots that are being captured have enough like rust and dust and lack of maintenance that to me it looks like the 5 to 10-year-old abandoned warehouses that I used to have to inventory. But that's like their gear that they're shipping to the front. And I think what actually happened is Russia collapsed, and they were just like, oh, well, we still have a bunch of military shit. They let it sit for 30 years, and it was probably on paper still in good condition. So they just sent it to the front, even though half of it is probably unusable.
And now we're sorry. And just to make it really quick before we move on to the next thing, we're now hearing a lot of information regarding that the Russians are having their own weapons cook off on them, particularly artillery shells.
Yep.
Well, and it makes you think too. I mean, they ostensibly have the largest nuclear weapons arsenal in the world, but I mean, when you hear things about nuclear weapon silos, like being filled with water, being poorly maintained, like, I mean, obviously it's likely that they still have enough nukes to, us in Russia to destroy the world over, but it does make you think on the quality.
It's like,
of the
will it
maintenance
actually
of
get out of
those.
the silo?
Yeah,
Exactly.
well, actually, so this is what's amazing. Like, imagine if you took the American military and then you just like put it in Detroit for like 50 fucking years, and that was the tax base that was used to support the military, and then you have the Russian military.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. I think what we're also seeing here, and this is something that Tiberius and I talked a little bit today on our earlier show when we talked about China, is that their top-down command control system, political and militarily, is very afraid to say something is wrong because they'll get murdered if they bring the bad news. Kill the messenger is very much a ongoing problem within the Russian society. And so what are you going to do? Are you going to come in and tell your boss that, hey, the stuff that we thought we had maintained, somebody actually sold? You ain't going to say that because you're going to die, and then they're going to die, and then the other person that was supposed to double check them are going to die. So why would you go through and actually admit to any fault? You're just going to be a nodding yes man. Yes, yes, sir. Everything is fine. Yes, yes, yes. And that's all we're seeing right now.
So, memes aside, unless anyone has anything further to say on this, I do want to move this into...
Well, one more meme, actually. Sure. This is kind of the thing. This is what I want the doomers, especially the doomers in my chat, to kind of contemplate, because there's like this entire generation of like American conservative and libertarian who just thinks that like up until this war, they were basically saying that it was going to be a multipolar world with Russia and China sucking away American influence, that we weren't going to be able to compete anymore, et cetera, et cetera. But what we've seen is like the rot that we kind of knew was in Russian culture, like laid bare for the entire world to see in the military and the logistics and the culture and the war and the propaganda and all that kind of stuff. And I just want people to, I'm not like trying to say like China isn't a problem, but I am trying to say like China has similar issues. For instance, part of the reason why you're seeing the real estate, like them literally blowing up real estate buildings, is because they had a bubble. But unlike the Americans, where we kind of let our bubble collapse and let like the private citizens like, suffer as a result, I'm pretty sure what they did is they froze the bank accounts of the people who had mortgages, and then they just started destroying unnecessary or poorly built housing. They basically covered up corruption through central planning. And I want you to think about that from a military perspective, where if you have those yes men, if you have those really cool developed technologies, but then nobody knows how to maintain them, if you don't flex logistics, I actually don't think the United States of America has some of the, like we do have the most advanced technology, but I think the stuff that we implement isn't necessarily that much better than our peers. I think what separates us from our peers is our ability to deploy them worldwide consistently with like 99% success rates for food, water, bullets, comms, gas, all that kind of stuff. Being able to make all that shit function is actually our strongest point.
Yeah, who knew trying to have to fight a war on two fronts would make you a logistic powerhouse? Go figure.
Well, in that skill set is you have to constantly hone it. So basically, constantly honing that logistics skill set, I think, puts us leagues ahead of our competitors, even if we weren't technologically ahead.
I don't disagree with that. But speaking of the our global presence, is that Carl and me probably largely disagree with this, and I want to kind of get in the weeds about this with a lot of our time, but I don't want to strawman you or put you in a position where like I'm going to phrase this. So you've largely told me at least that you're not a big fan of the American Empire. I would believe you said something along the lines that you would like to see a more multipolar world. So I'm going to let you like frame the conversation any way you want, and then we'll have at it.
I mean, yeah, for the most part, I don't think empires of any type are good. We can make the case of, are some empires more moral than others? Potentially. But I think that, the most moral internal societies, and, this is true of the British Empire, internally, Britain was a very open and free society comparatively to the rest of the world. But in how they chose to enact their influence on other countries was very authoritarian, very aggressive. And I think you see the same thing with America. We have some of the most liberal free speech laws in the world, for example, but in terms of who we support, internationally, it doesn't reflect that whatsoever. So no, I don't think it's a good thing that the U.S. exerts its influence the way that it does, particularly militarily.
Gotcha. So I'm sure like all of us want to jump at the bit here. So who wants it?
Well, I was going to say kind of. I like to quote Antifa General Joseph R. Biden with "Don't compare me to the Almighty, compare me to the alternative." I think there's a lot of things. If your criticism is that we can do the same thing with less moral culpability and malevolence, less bloodshed, and maybe a little bit more financial efficiency, I'm going to agree with you. And not only that, I'm going to start making suggestions. But I think that my main beef is primarily with like pretty far. Actually, isolationists of any side. I don't agree with it. I don't believe in it. I think that if you look at the global economic system, it's a $65 trillion commercial empire, and we're trying to get the remaining $24 trillion of economic activity under the American hegemonic umbrella. And that's the way that I view it. So it sucks that 18-year-old Americans are being told that they're going to be fighting for strip clubs, apple pie, and whiskey, and then they end up going to fight for Raytheon and petroleum. But unfortunately, that's just kind of the nature of the beast if you want global commerce.
I think the issue you kind of run into is that fear of the alternative oftentimes point to a boogeyman that isn't necessarily there. I think that you can point to most of our kind of adventures in Latin America to do that. I mean, so much of what we were doing throughout the 70s and 80s was, out of the fear that the Soviets would, gain greater control in the region. But in reality, the forces we were supporting were undeniably worse than the forces we were opposing.
So my question...
I'm not a leftist, so I have mixed opinions on anti-leftist military action.
When Pinochet is chopping people up and throwing them out of helicopters, Allende was not doing that.
Well, you want free helicopter rides for everybody? No,
yeah. What you want healthcare? You want food? You fucking communist!
Get out the airplane to go. No, but Carl, my question to you is your problem in empire generally, imperialism generally, or is it in the way that it has been done historically? Because there are things that we can argue about, you and I, on either of those. Because I am one of the other more left-leaning people here, but when it comes to international relations and foreign policy, I tend to follow more of a realpolitik kind of lens about this. But before I go in hard on what you're saying, I wanted, and also buttressed in by Just War Theory by Walzer. Everybody should read that book. If you haven't read that book, go do so. But that's why I want to know. I want to know what your actual thought is about that, because that's going to determine how I approach this conversation.
Okay, there's so much, and I almost feel like I should be taking it, because what I think his name is Counterpoints. I think there was something I wanted to address that you said also. You mentioned the point of isolationism. I don't consider myself an isolationist. I know that that's more of a kind of a trend growing on the right now. You have these they're all savages. Let's leave them to themselves, like the Tucker Carlsons of the world. That is not the camp I fall into. I do consider myself like an internationalist. I just don't think the way we go about engaging with the world is the best way to do it. And I think that kind of to allude what you were saying, I think your name was Cypher, is that I think hopefully we're all realpolitik. Hopefully we're all engaging in the world, as is, and not having these utopian ideals. I think the thing is, to kind of go after one of the biggest proponents of that, Henry Kissinger. Yeah. I think realpolitik is good. I don't think you needed to support a genocide in Bengal to engage in negotiations with China, right? I think oftentimes this kind of realpolitik mantra is kind of touted out there, not really just to kind of get away with supporting various atrocities. I don't think it's actually often the most strategic thing to do. I think our policy.
I'm so happy you said that, because basically all the realpolitik were they were all Russian simps where the war started, and they're like, well, Ukraine can't win, so you just have to deal with it. And that was all Sargon of Akkad on Sitch and Adam. He was like, well, I'm not saying the Russians are right. I'm just saying that they're going to do it. And you could tell there was a little bit of sympathy there. Yeah. So hiding behind, sorry, 1 second, hiding behind the veneer of pragmatism to justify whatever fucked up thing is going on the planet. And I'm happy you said the term internationalism. because basically one of my biggest frustrations is this binary between globalization and isolationism. Internationalism to me actually seems like the perfect center, where it's like we're a part of an international community. We act as individual sovereign nations, but there are group responsibilities that we have coming down the pipe. We have to work together in order to take on these group responsibilities, and those include the security and promotion of healthy, happy, free nations. So I think that's fucking absolutely based.
Yeah, I agree. I have nothing I can say to that. No, go ahead. I was just saying I can't add to it. So go.
I don't know if it's just because I'm retarded and I'm not clear on what you're saying here, Carl. Maybe somebody else missed it in the chat, so I'll ask for them. So what is your beef exactly, or maybe what's your prescription? Are you saying that you want us to be less involved or be differently involved?
I think I want us to be differently involved, right? Much of like our military action, I want us to be less involved, but I want us to be like, I think we should be doing a less kind of predatory form of the Belt and Road in Africa. I think that is how we should be competing with China, not attempting to like build up our military. I think that we should be trying to, have, the IMF clearly isn't cutting it in terms of, giving these countries loans that, they clearly are going after, the Belt and Road is arguably slightly less predatory than certain aspects of the IMF structural adjustment programs. And so like, I think that we should be trying to combat it in that way. I don't think we should be trying to, China strikes a deal with some, leader in Africa to, start building some infrastructure, and we just support a coup to overthrow him. I think that the alternative would be we should actually just try to propose a better deal.
So so this is where one can begin to argue, because I think most of us are actually on the same page here. But where the difference would be is what would you have America do if the alternative that you're proposing failed, and the only option left was a system dominated by China? What is your alternative?
Can we concretize that a little bit? Yeah.
Let's give an example. So we talked about Tiberius and I talked about Ethiopia about 2 weeks ago. We talked about China today, and China was offering Ethiopia a deal, and they said, well, you reneged on your deal, we're going to own all this stuff. And Ethiopia since came in and said, hey, we're going to nationalize this. Let's have a counterfactual where they didn't nationalize it. They just succumbed to whatever the hell China wanted. And now China has another 2 or 3 military bases in one of the fastest growing population centers in Africa, and also having access to all the the saltwater ports over on the Horn of Africa. What would your alternative be if our offer of a better deal just didn't go through because for whatever reason the leader didn't want it or what have you?
Well, I think a certain amount of national sovereignty has to be taken into account. But I guess then I would ask you, what is the alternative? You're saying we support like Integrate, like the TPLF or whatever. Is it that we support those? I think that they're more separatists, right? We would back them to try and destabilize the country even more, or like what would be?
It depends.
Like
right?
So you're saying butter doesn't work, we bring in the bullets, or what are you saying exactly?
What I'm getting at is like say in that example, China wins. That's not necessarily a nation that has self-determination at that point, right? They're saying we can't tell China to fuck off. We can't tell China to fuck off. We don't have the ability to kick them out. We don't have the ability to nationalize this industry because we don't know how to run it or whatever else. Like all these things that are possible, right? So we're going to succumb to China and basically have a little China in the Horn of Africa. What would you support to stop that from happening?
I think we have to that's the thing. So let's take Vietnam, for example. Like, you can say maybe you didn't want, the Soviet Union, or I guess, Red China to have as much influence in Vietnam. But I think it's pretty safe to say that what we ended up doing in the country made it substantially worse. I mean, they're literally to this day, like still children in Vietnam being born with like birth defects because of what we did. And so I would need to know like the alternative you're proposing. If do I think we should go start bombing Ethiopia in response to them allowing more Chinese influence? No,
I'm not proposing an alternative. I want to know what your alternative would be to what you said that the U.S. does.
You have to accept it.
So you have to accept it. So there's nothing that the U.S. should do or can do in order to prevent in this hypothetical that I've created, China from having a little China in the Horn of Africa.
I mean, should do. I think that there are potentially things that could be done differently, but I think that one of the things that almost certainly wouldn't be better would be attempted like a regime change. Going to bomb the country. I don't think that would, because that's the thing. I mean, a lot of these.
You wouldn't continue support for the TPLF in this instance, even though they're currently being ethnically cleansed from the country?
I mean, so it's one of those things where obviously the TPLF is kind of more of a sticky issue because, as we know in Tigray, TPLF has done a fair amount of atrocities as well. It's
sure.
No one's hands are clean in this situation, but I think funneling more weapons in so that more people die in the country and so that more people, because at the end of the day, supporting the TPLF wouldn't even change that scenario. It would just result in more blood loss that would potentially make things a little bit more chaotic for China, right?
It
wouldn't actually make the situation better.
What if we came in, not guns blazing, but like just giant fucking hammer, boom, down, right?
Where does that work though? When has that ever worked? That's what I got to say.
And that makes the TPLF win.
Animal?
It did work in Europe. Isn't that essentially what we did to stop Bosnia-Herzegovina from
Bosnia
deteriorating further?
I think
Isn't
Japan,
that what we did for Kosovo?
So let's look at some. So I think the European examples are interesting. Maybe they're worth some examination. But I think that the more recent ones, we can see that the U.S. certainly doesn't have the capacity to enforce its will militarily on other. Iraq is the obvious, or Afghanistan, for example. We're 20 years trying to nation
military
it fell apart.
Or a political
it fell apart within. It's always politically. That's the thing. We never technically lost a single battle in Vietnam. We lost a political fight. We didn't lose the military fight. We never lost a battle in Afghanistan.
Well,
except
I want to,
technically speaking.
I'll let Connor go from her.
Yeah, I want to kind of bring this down because my thing is, or what was revelatory but also kind of fucked up, is it's like this Clausewitz quote that I always bring up, which is war is diplomacy by other means. And when you start thinking about it that way, the interesting thing about it is you see the spectrum of like achieving goals, and you also see you can kind of separate out like what you think or what I think would be appropriate for a war. So, for instance, like with Ukraine, I would have sued for peace on the first day. I would have given them every single thing, like east of the Dnipro, except for like maybe some of the northeastern regions. The western Ukraine keeps Odessa, eastern Ukraine keeps Mariupol. Have all the ethnic Ukrainians immigrate to the west side of the river. Have all the Russians immigrate to the eastern side of the river. Like literally, I just would have said, let's draw a new fucking border because clearly this shit isn't working out. Let's not kill tens of thousands of people. But that logic of trying to preserve human life is counter to the actual logic of the diplomatic goals of Ukraine, which is fuck these Russian fucks, fuck them for trying to take our shit. We're going to kick them in the dick as hard as we can. We're going to make them regret trying to take our territory, and we're going to get as much of our territory back as we possibly can. And so that's where, for me,
I can think you can force people to sue for peace if they don't want to. But I'm sure you guys probably saw I think it was The Nation that was reporting on it. Boris Johnson potentially, obviously we don't have to speak on this with too certainty but let's say in a hypothetical world this did happen, where Zelensky was attempting to sue for a tentative peace with Russia, but we're going to be required on some certain security guarantees from the West, and Boris Johnson basically came and said, no, we're not going to do that. We want you guys to keep fighting. And so I think that, let's just hypothetically, let's say that was on the table, would that have been something you guys support? Should Boris Johnson not have made that call?
I wouldn't have supported it. I'll come out and say it. No.
What would have supported the war continuing, or would have supported the war coming to an end?
I would have supported the war continuing.
Yeah, so that's kind of the thing. What I'm trying to point out though is that there's there's multiple moral systems competing all at the same time. And when you're talking about like especially historical conflicts, a lot of people kind of dismiss the battle between like socialism and communism because it's just economics as not necessarily like a moral one. But I think that, moral being broadly defined as what's good and what's bad, actually does have a lot of bearing on looking at these conflicts. So to the American capitalists, imperialists, whatever, socialism and communism, particularly like atheistic, secular atheist and communism, was a fucking satanic, anti-God, anti-capitalist, anti-Western, anti-everything cult that was sweeping the world. And as a result, it's not measured in the human lives that are lost. It's measured in the souls of the future of the world and what system they subscribe to and whether or not you view it as good or evil. I'm almost sure if you talk to the Maoists or the Stalinists or whatever, they would couch their worldview in similar terms, where the bloodshed is actually not what they care about. It's about vying for the economic and social souls of the world. And whether or not they win with their ideology is actually what's more important than the sacrifice. So that for me, when you're talking about like some African backwater where there's like some resistance force that can't actually win versus like China, I'm not making this calculation, but I know American strategists are making the calculation of we can't let China get strong in Africa because then they have a better ability to forward their worldview across the world, which we think is fundamentally evil. And that's why they're willing to spill African blood.
I think the issue you run into, but we're also very willing to spill African blood. I don't think you can take that out of the equation. We've been, historically, we've been very willing to. And I think that when you talk about this very abstract, vying for the souls, I think it's more helpful to, kind of go into like specific examples. Because obviously there are certain times, like, it was actually, Cypher, you said this originally, and I never actually answered. You said, are you against, I don't know if this was the specific way you phrased it, but like American imperialism or like imperialism more abstractly. Obviously, I'm against imperialism more abstractly. I'm not one of these people that says, oh, as long as it's not America doing it, it's completely fine. Russia is just doing,
it's
perfectly good in Ukraine. It's actually good what China's doing in Taiwan. I'm obviously not one of those people that says that. I think imperialism, across the board is terrible. But I think we have to see that oftentimes, I think our actions make these countries more amenable to the influence of China, or if you want to go back to the influence of the Soviet Union. I think you saw this with Afghanistan. Afghanistan willingly took in some support from China. Iraq is willingly taking in some support from China. I think a good example of this is Cuba, because when you want to talk about the morality of it, most people, say we oppose Castro because he's a dictator, but obviously that's not why we oppose Castro. We supported Batista. There was little slavery still taking place in Cuba. We had zero issue with it because he was our guy. Batista was our guy and he supported our interests. But as soon as Castro took over, and we opposed that not because he's a dictator, but because he was a rogue dictator. He didn't support it. So that's why we supported Saddam Hussein. We had no problem with his aggression towards Iran. We just had an issue when he started being aggressive towards countries we didn't want him to be.
We also supported both sides of that war, so there is
exactly.
That
that's what I'm saying though. Like when we try to make it a moral question, I think we actually have to talk about what's really happening. We can't just say abstractly these are good, these are bad. To look at the specifics.
Yeah, it's not. I wouldn't want to say it's black or white at all. But Osiris, you wanted to break in with something, so I'll cede to you.
Hold on, my wife called me.
Okay.
Real quick, the question is, can since World War II, can you point to anything in your opinion that America has done right under the banner of imperialism?
I think you can make the case that what we did in Kosovo was the most justified. How our intervention in the breakup of Yugoslavia was, Milosevic was pretty terrible. Obviously, there was certain things I think we could have done differently. But for the most part, if you had to pick one that was the most moral, I would say it's obviously that one.
I love talking to Serbs about that shit because they basically treat it like it was like an anti-Serbian genocide on behalf of like America instead of them like trying to fucking slaughter Croats and fucking Bosniaks and Muslims and fucking everybody, dude.
That's two separate situations though. So the Kosovo was
Albanians.
Yeah, so Kosovo is Albania.
I'm sorry if I conflated it.
No, I'm just making sure. So would you count both of those in that, or just one? I just wanted some clarity.
I think. Okay, so here's the thing: is you also have to take into account what we are currently supporting at the time, because I am also of the opinion, like, okay, if we don't want ethnic cleansing to be happening. Well, all throughout that period, we were supporting Turkey ethnically cleansing various Kurdish groups. Now, obviously, they would say, "Oh, well, the PKK was bad, so that's why we had to ethnically cleanse the Kurdish group." Well, it's like, that's what the Milosevic would have said about the KLA guerrillas. And so, like, I think that if we think these acts are bad, and also scale is something that should be taken into account as well. But I think that our interventions there, if we had to pick a moral, like I said, I think you have to hammer down the specifics a little bit more. But those two would probably be the most moral interventions that we've had since World War II. Obviously, and yes, wait, just to clear the question, yes, I did support entering World War II.
Okay,
some people don't. I do.
So I would add more than that. I would add the Korean conflict, even though we supported what amounted to a fascist dictator in the end of that. And I would also include the Desert Storm, because both of those were acts of aggression by another country in order to exert its dominance over an entire region. In the case of North and South Korea, that would have been the Soviets, and the Soviet system is shit, and we know what happened under the Soviet system. And in the case of Desert Storm, that was an act of aggression by Saddam against Kuwait. Now, we can quibble whether or not they were actually stealing his oil or not, but he decided to invade over that for strategic reasons. And if that was the case, that should have been handled differently by him. But once he invaded, he lost moral authority to do anything, and that's when we were given the moral authority to support Kuwait.
Wait, then that means we lost our moral authority centuries ago. If as soon as you launch an invasion, you lose moral authority. We're so out of the conversation then.
You lose moral authority within that conflict. It is not a permanent loss of moral authority. So once we beat Saddam back into Iraq and said, okay, we're not going to finish the job, you stay in Iraq. I know that the point eventually was to remove Saddam Hussein. There was multiple laws passed in the United States. I'm saying as of Bush 1, that was the thing. He beat him out of Kuwait, beat him in Kuwait, turned the country back over to him, and said, "We're done."
Well, we didn't even want Saddam. We didn't even want Saddam out, though. I mean, that was the thing. I mean, Colin Powell has talked about this. There were Shia uprisings in Iraq at the time that we chose to just. We were there. We could have backed those forces, but we chose to let Saddam crush them because we didn't want more.
That was under Bush.
So,
once Bush lost,
and who asked Bush not to take out Saddam? It was all the Gulf states. They basically said it's fucked up to have Americans come in and depose a Sunni leader. We don't want that to happen.
Pretty much.
And basically Bush and Colin Powell and Donald Rumsfeld were all debating about whether or not it would be good to take out Saddam. They all thought that it was a good idea, but then they didn't think that pissing off all of their Gulf allies would be worth it, which we just did 20 years later, anyways. But what I want to point out is, like, so we're talking about morality. The reason why the reason why I kind of, I don't want to say wash my hands, but the reason why I kind of back off and I say, like, I'm not an individual participant in this. I'm a part of the system, and it's, I either choose to support the system half-assed or whole-assed or not at all. And for me, even with all the examples that we brought up as good moral stuff, I don't even know anything. I don't know anything specific about, like, Kosovo or the intervention in the former Yugoslavia that was bad. But in Iraq, in Korea, in Vietnam, and specifically Iraq and Korea, you could make arguments that these were, like, positive moral things that the United States did, not just at the time, but also in outcome. But there's individual moral horrors that take place in each conflict. For instance, we did not have, like, precision munitions or smart munitions in the Korean conflict, and we were still using a World War II mindset of basically the civilian population supports the military, therefore civilian targets are okay. And so we actually bombed like 80%, 90% of the civilian infrastructure of North Korea for the better part of like 10 years. And I'm pretty sure we actually killed like 20 or 30% of their civilian population over the course of like 4 or 5 years through an air campaign. So that's like a moral fucking horror. That's like borderline slow rolling genocide. But based on the morality at the time, they started it. And on top of that, based on the morality of the time, the civilians are they support the military infrastructure, therefore they're a legitimate target. Then what I was going to say too, even with something as recent and clean as the Persian Gulf War, the first Persian Gulf War, there was the Highway of Death where Saddam Hussein's largely conscript army of young men was fleeing back into Kuwait. The battle had already been won. The Iraqi army was en route, and you can actually watch live leak videos of American fighter jets and helicopters killing Iraqi soldiers after they had thrown their weapons and started fleeing into the desert. They literally threw down their guns and ran into the desert, and we killed them anyway. So that's kind of my I know I'm just muddying the waters even more. Sure. But my point is that I'm saying, like, the clean morality of a conflict that's just, I view the Ukrainian conflict as just. I view American support for Ukraine as good. I view Western democracies banding together to give technology to a weaker power to fight off a higher power, a stronger power, as a good thing. That being said, I have no doubt in my fucking mind that the Ukrainians have thrown a few artillery shells into majority Russian ethnic fucking enclaves and probably killed a few kids. And so you kind of just have to accept at some point that this is the reality of war. And then that's what I was kind of saying. If you accept that even in a good war, quote unquote, there's going to be bad moral outcomes, then what it boils down to re-abstract back out for the macro analysis is who do we want in charge of the world? And does that have material impact? The answer is obviously yes, for it doesn't have material impact. The next question is, who do you want in charge of the world and why?
Okay, so that's
before you answer that, I want to, because I was gonna actually ask you a question, but Connor beautifully stated that, because I was gonna basically say, well, if these are situations that you said were good in your eyes, of how America intervened or took part in the world's politics, at what point do you want us to cede soft power, and how much of that soft power?
We're talking soft power. This whole time we've been talking hard power.
Well,
What do you mean by soft power?
I'm okay. Let me be more clear. Not specifically soft power, our hard power and our ability to just have influence in the world, even at the cost of military intervention or
like if China draws a hard line in the sand, they said, don't fuck with Ethiopia, how hard do we have to back off?
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
I think that I believe in more outcomes and I want to respond to Sting. That's okay. We'll still talk about it though. We'll still talk about it. I think it's more of kind of the outcomes, and so I think you have to look at kind of specific situations, and you can't just in the abstract say, when would we back off? Well, you'd have to know what are the alternatives. I'm very much a utilitarian in that sense. So if this one's better than the other, even if both aren't ideal. And I think that it's an interesting thing what Counterpoints was making about the just because a war maybe just doesn't mean individual actions are, and that's why international law has always made that distinction. Just because you launch an unjust war, that doesn't mean that you can't still have war crimes within that. It doesn't the whole thing carte blanche doesn't just become bad. But with Korea, or actually no, I want to talk about the first. Go for it first. I think that when we talk about this, always just baffles me with Saddam. All of the worst things we hear about Saddam Hussein were all things that happened while we supported him. The Halabja massacre, the entire Anfal campaign, that was all while we were still arming and backing Saddam Hussein. And so I don't get me wrong, I don't think he should have invaded Kuwait, but I think that we didn't, it's not like we cared about the people of Kuwait at the time. What we cared about is we were worried that they would keep going and try to go to Saudi Arabia.
That's so what they were worried about too. And also the oil implications, what happens with
Saudis?
Yes, the Saudis.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Obviously. I mean, I don't put a whole lot of stock in what the Saudi.
Yeah.
I don't care too much what the Saudis are interested in. But also, to be fair, our decision to be, you can go all the way back there. I mean, part of that was the U.S.'s positioning troops in Saudi Arabia was part of, obviously, Osama bin Laden was already, he's going down a bad path, so to speak. But that was one of the things that radicalized him, very, very intensely. That's really interesting. When you get no. I'm just saying that, just to kind of expand on that a little bit. I mean, the U.S. reaction to 9/11 was almost exactly what bin Laden wanted. He thought because he didn't think that they were going to launch their attacks. That was going to be the end of the U.S. That we were some paper tiger or something. What he thought is that it would, spark the U.S. to engage in a bunch of wars in the Middle East, and then that would, bring about some, global caliphate or whatever nonsense he thought. But the reality is we did exactly what he wanted. We responded exactly how we wanted to. We launched a ton of wars in the Middle East, and extremism arguably grew out of that. I think largely our response to 9/11 was pretty bad, at least militarily. But anyway, I can talk about Korea. I am not a moral relativist. I don't agree with this. These sorts of aerial bombardments were okay at the time, and so that means it's okay. That's just not the way I look at. I think that morality. I don't think that I can't get behind moral relativism.
I don't think Carl. Dude, go ahead and answer.
Oh, dude, I was just going to say, so if there was a question, I missed it. But I got to say, it's so fucking based hearing somebody talk about Osama bin Laden's game plan, because it's literally available in English, on websites that you can just Google. And we never talk about that shit. We never talk about the fact that we played right into his fucking hand. We never talk about the shit that we literally spent billions, trillions of dollars and thousands of lives in fucking treasure. We never talked about the fact that we basically gave him exactly what we wanted. And the only thing that happened is the empire didn't collapse yet. But that's kind of the thing is if we had been smarter, more surgical, they talk about counterterrorism plus, or what was it? Obama was talking about CT plus. which is basically moving from a militaristic mindset where we're invading other countries to a policing mindset where if you're a part of an active terrorist organization, we're going to hunt you down and kill you with special forces and drone strikes with as few civilian casualties as possible. Like that is kind of what I wanted to talk about, like violent centrism, where the war on terror is going to happen whether we like it or not. Terrorism is still a fucking thing whether we like it or not. We can get a lot more bang for the buck and a lot less collateral damage if we stop the large-scale invasions.
Yeah, I'm not pro large-scale invasions either. Just to be
I don't think anybody is really.
Unfortunately, some of the people in the government are annex Canada.
Yeah,
I know
the northern
Mexico.
United States, of course. Yeah, like the northern USA, we have to form that.
It is America, though. Am I right?
Like, yeah. Tiberius, you're a part. You're a Peter Zeihan fan. There's a part of Canada he wants to. Doesn't he? He wants part of Canada to become part of the U.S. Doesn't he?
So it's not about what he wants. Like I don't think he really gives a shit if the Canadians are part of the United States. What he was predicting back in 2014 was that Alberta was going to find themselves in a political situation to where they could either stick it out with the Canadians and get taxed or have the crap taxed out of them. They could go for independence, or they could look at the United States and say, "Hey, look, would you like a 51st state?" Right now, it looks like that time has passed, and he's openly said that. He's like, basically the Albertans made their choice. But to kind of second that a little bit, I think that choice is going to come back around again because it's not too much longer. Ottawa is just not going to be able to afford buying off Quebec anymore. So I think that conversation is going to come back again. But that's an incomplete divergence. I didn't want to derail it. I didn't want to derail it. I do want to kind of get back to this, and I want to go back to basics for this argument, because the problem is, to frame my thoughts on like the American Empire, is that I have to prove a bit of a negative. And I'll put it this way: when it comes to having a monopower or a monopolar world versus a bipolar world versus a multipolar world, I think the monopolar world, unless it's literally like Nazi Germany or the Soviet Union running everything, is probably better. And the reason why is I'm going to make the assertion that having the United States put the British and the French and the Germans and the Japanese and a lot of the what we would call the former imperial powers under one team and under one aegis has probably saved billions or a billion lives at this point, because you don't have these powers trying to one up each other in an ever increasing game of brinksmanship to the point where you have a war breaking out among the major powers every 30 years. Now, granted, there's some details in there we can talk about. Has nuclear weapons scared the shit out of everybody, so another war won't happen again? We can talk a little bit about trade interconnections. But I'll put it in this regard. A lot of the major things that that the Americans have really horrifically done in the past 70 years since World War II ended was largely to counter the Soviets, whether it was supporting Saddam, whether it was supporting a lot of cringe sons of bitches throughout that time. But I would actually make the argument that outside of Iraq and Afghanistan and a few other small examples, that the United States, being basically the monopower, has been incredibly good for humanity as a whole. We've seen global GDP increase by like a factor of 3. Human rights are becoming a thing for places that never we thought would ever have it. And just kind of having it where there is a world order where basically everyone plays by the Americans' rules, which I will say is largely pretty light-handed, has been a wonderful thing.
Liberalism is cringe, but it's less cringe than everything else.
I don't see how we can say that though. When what has stopped great power conflict since World War II has not been unipolarity. It has been, I said polarity right there. It has been fear of nuclear war. I mean, that is why the Soviets and the U.S. didn't go to direct conflict. That's what's stopping China, Russia, and the U.S. from engaging in direct conflict. It has been unquestionably nukes. I mean, after World War II, the European power basically said to each other, like, hey, if we do this again, we are going to destroy everything. We will destroy the entire world. And I feel like fear of that is what has prevented great power war.
So I think you're... Go ahead. No, I was just gonna go with what you're saying. I think basically what you're saying is the reason that we're in a situation where it's just hedged down to 3 powers or 2 powers is because of the coalescing of the European nations and Western society under the banner of America. If we didn't have the banner of America, then you'd have other powers fighting each other. Maybe it wouldn't be nuclear war. Maybe it wouldn't be.
Well,
so, I'm just not sure.
I want to point out. Sorry, real quick. I just want to point out that the American global commercial empire is $65 trillion of like $90 trillion of GDP, like worldwide. Like when you talk about our antagonists, it's like Venezuela, Iran, North Korea, China, and I'm pretty sure they represent like a total of 20 or 30 trillion dollars of GDP. Or is it billion or trillion?
Trillion.
I forget.
You put it all together with the Russians and the Chinese, you're about 20 trillion in the whole. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, but my point being that like we already make up like 80%. Us and our allies already make up like 70%, 80% of global commerce.
Sure. No, I don't deny like Western hegemony whatsoever. I'm saying if the argument is what has prevented another world war from breaking out, it seems pretty clear that it's not hegemony. I mean, in fact, the Western European powers came together not because of the U.S. but because of fear of the Soviets. It was literally the lack of unipolarity that they were worried about, that other polar, the Soviets. And now while we may look back on it, the Soviet system collapsed, that's not what they thought at the time. They didn't view it as a unipolar moment. They viewed it as very much a multi, and that fear and then of the nuclear conflict breaking out there, that is what stopped the war from happening, in my opinion.
It was bipolar in the fact that the rest of the West was completely and utterly decimated. They didn't have any ability to defend themselves against the Russian invasions. They coalesced under the United States for that protection, the security umbrella protection, the Iron Curtain fell.
I think he's talking about the globe.
Yeah.
Yes, but this is where we can talk about whether or not nukes had succeeded in this or not, because we have the issue of imperialism still going on in the global South, and every single player not every single player fighting each other for those resources and those gains. It was simply being a handful because of what Tiberius said, which is the United States has brought in the rest of the West under its own security umbrella and under its own interest. So we might not be in a single monopolar world, but we have a lot less plural. We're a lot less multipolar than we would be had that not happened. And I think that is why we haven't seen more conflict than what we have.
Wait, but I think we do still see like lots of conflict. I mean, the war between like Rwanda and the Congo has killed like millions of people. I mean, we don't hear and talk about it.
That's not an imperialism.
What are you talking about?
Yeah, we're talking past each other.
Those are black people.
Wait.
I was waiting for it. Say no racist. Say it.
Slight no racist, but those are black people in places with difficult to reach resources. Okay, so I mean, like they're not exactly on the coast. They're in Central Africa. They're black people. They're killing each other with machetes. Like I know they're like human beings and all that, but
well, they're not just killing each other. There's lots of foreign powers in there killing them too. Let's be clear.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's what I'm getting at. No, that's what I'm getting at.
That is imperialism, though. That is imperialism, though. It's just smaller scale imperialism.
That's not imperialism of great powers fighting each other on the scale that can decimate an entire world. So if we didn't have the United States security umbrella and the coalition of the rest of the West under the United States, rest of the West plus Japan and a few others, under the United States umbrella, those powers would also be fighting in these other places and avoiding direct conflict, but having these proxy wars with proxy troops and their own troops
in like Syria,
fighting it out.
They're still kind of doing
exactly like Syria.
But that still happens, though.
But Syria,
but to what degree?
Exactly,
because it's like a mob. It's like a mob boss. It's like the only fights that go down, or like the only assassinations or killings that go down, are the ones that are permitted by the boss. And so, like that's when you look at it, that's exactly what's going on. Is in order for a global conflict to happen.
But you're I think you're still not understanding.
But you're making the case that it's like localized. We saw it all throughout Latin America, for example. Almost every country in Latin America had those proxy fights.
You're not understanding me.
Those were brown people.
Okay, come on, Connor, dude.
No racist.
No, why are you?
Okay. I'm memeing, but I'm also serious. Like.
He's not wrong.
Understand,
how people approach this.
The United States and Europeans, they like is it white people fighting? Okay, we care about it. Is it brown people fighting? Okay, do they have resources? Resources, we care about it. No resources, we don't care about.
Yeah.
Is it black people fighting? Okay, do they? We don't care. Do they have resources? Do they not have resources? They don't have resources. Okay, we definitely don't care. They do have resources. Okay, how much resources is it worth caring about? And that's like the subconscious.
Yes. That's perfect.
That's a subconscious Western like allegedly humanitarian calculus for
Correct.
our imperial adventures.
But
I think.
But my point,
Cypher, I'm not misunderstanding you. I'm disagreeing with you. I don't think it's localized. I think
I'm not saying it's localized. Okay, that's what I'm saying. I'm not saying it's localized. What I'm saying is you have the United States and its partners coalescing under one group, fighting Russia, China, and a few other people under their group, instead of it being the U.S. versus the Germans versus the French versus the Chinese versus the Japanese versus the Russia, and all of these what would be great powers under their own umbrella fighting it out together on the global south. So instead of having,
so if I'm understanding you right, so you're saying so instead of it being a proxy between Iran and the US in Yemen, you're saying it could be France and the UK in Yemen. Like that's
correct.
What you're saying?
I'm saying
why is that preferable?
Because
it's still happening though.
Because of the competing interests of all of the sub-factions. We already deal with this on some level where France was caught selling weapons to Iraq after the embargoes or whatever, and we basically slapped their dicks behind the scenes. You don't want to have France, Germany, all these people basically undercutting each other's efforts, because then what you're talking about is counterproductive shit. It's better to have the Western world fighting in the same direction than us fighting ourselves in order to have this world. And on top of that, I think the ultimate goal would be to fold Russia into the hegemony if they were willing to do so. As a matter of fact, I think we probably tried a few times. I just don't think they were willing to, because they wanted to be seen as a peer power, not as a subordinate power.
No, actually, we fucked that one up.
I think that supports my argument. I put the blame on the US on that one.
Let me split some hairs real quick. I gotta get back in here for a second, please.
Fine. It's your show. All
right. I know. Anyway, so when it comes to what Connor said, is that we really had a really good opportunity when we brought Eastern Europe back into the fold during the 1990s into the 2000s, that we could have extended that hand to Russia. We absolutely didn't. Whether you want to say it was correct or not, whether you want to say that, we just couldn't get over our grievances, we openly just pretty much pissed in the hands of the Russians. And that is literally why Vladimir Putin came to power, is that Boris Yeltsin, for all of his problems, was definitely more of the reformist type that wanted to see a better future for the Russian people. They really were interested in adopting capitalism, a more liberalized form of politics and economic system. And we just did not help. We were not interested outside of a few particular business interests and a few particular political action groups. But the actual work that we did to bring in the Poles and the Hungarians from the United States State Department was just not fucking there. So I'm absolutely going to say we fucked up there. When it comes to what my core argument, which you guys have largely made for me, and I don't know if Carl's still listening, hopefully he is that what
I'm here. I'm just grabbing a charger. I'm here.
Sure, no problem. What really concerns me is the idea that if Connor and Cypher has made my point effectively, is that the more imperial powers that you have is the more likely that eventually, sooner or later, somebody lets a nuke off the chain. And that's kind of the issue that I have, is that I'm not going to dissuade that nuclear weapons have scared the hell out of everybody, especially with hydrogen bombs that can literally wipe out a city in an instant. What is concerning to me is that basically for every major or regional power that actually has those weapons and may want to use them, the more that exists, the more that possibility could be there. Now, so far, even the most vitriolic enemies such as India and Pakistan haven't gone at it. So I have to admit, my side doesn't have the best argument here, because anyone who has gotten nuclear weapons hasn't been invaded. On the other side of that, I'm going to just make this big claim here. I think it's only a matter of time, and I'm willing to bet that sooner or later we're going to see two regional powers who come to a disagreement, and somebody's going to throw one.
Yeah, and just to make sure that I'm clear, Carl, and I hope this brings the point home, is the reason that I believe that it is preferable to have one group, one entity to have represent all these groups, is that you don't end up having those other entities fighting each other. And when they are not fighting each other, there's less likelihood of, like Tiberius was saying, I wouldn't go as far as nuclear, but there's less likelihood of them going to war at all, because they're all in similar interest with under the same kind of, for lack of a better word, hegemon. And so as long as that is maintained, then when you are engaged in these imperialist conflicts, if you want to call them that, some of them are, some of them aren't, but I'll give it to you. when you're engaged in these imperialist conflicts, you're not having every single side fighting every single side, and that actually tamps down on the level of death and the level of destruction that happens.
This is why we need aliens. This is why we need aliens, so we can unify as a planet in order to fight them and become space imperialists. And like, I'm only half joking.
You just want to be an ultramarine. Come on, we know.
You're not wrong, but I am serious that like I think the only thing that'll unify humanity is hatred of an alien.
You guys ever heard that Reagan and Gorbachev apparently in negotiations said if the U.S. was ever invaded by aliens that they would agree to put aside differences and fight together? You guys ever heard that?
But that's like, that's like what we legitimately need to fucking do is like actually have an external threat.
Wait, here's a real question. Wait, Connor. Real question. Well, if the aliens invade, are black people real people now?
Yeah. there's only one race, the human race. And you know, black people, I guess we'll let you.
I mean, there are some people who don't think. Okay, let's move on.
No.
Unless of course, it's South Park style. In which case, everybody just goes back to their alien tribes.
Well, actually, so what I liked was there was this meme. There was this black guy who got pissed off because some black dude married into a white family twice, and so the granddaughter looked white as fuck. And I was like, sweet. We're going to do like the reverse great replacement where we're just going to start banging black people until they're white as fuck.
Whoa! Wording, Connor, wording. I told you.
What? Connor. Consensually.
Connor, I love you, but why did you turn into Samantha? Like, I was hoping that we had
this is tame compared to Samantha. All I said that I was going to have sex with Osiris until he was white. What are you talking about? What's the problem? Consensually.
Carl, are you okay, man? You're seeming a little miffed.
I don't know what that one's about. But wait,
we're in our political circle. Yeah, in our political circle, there's actual like race realists and shit. So they're like legitimately concerned about the future of the white race and shit. So I try to assuage their concerns through memes.
Go watch the shark video about it. It's pretty good.
Good. That's good to assuage race realist concerns. That is good. But on the point that you were making about, I guess I just disagree that we're seeing less conflict. Like I understand the idea.
It's not about
compared to the alternative.
Yeah, it's compared to the alternative here. So
no. That's what I'm saying. Yeah, that's what I'm disagreeing about. I don't think that compared to the alternative of. I guess when we say alternative, I guess I'm curious. Like, I'm not saying that like the UK and France should like no longer be allies with the US. Like, that's not what I'm saying. I guess I'm saying that like.
What if the United States withdrew from Europe after World War II and said, "Fuck it, y'all figure it out"? What if in the Far East, instead of like going after the the domino theory or whatever, what if we said, "Fucking Asian people figure it out"? Like, what if we just said, I'm trying to think of a more recent conflict. What if we said that petroleum is not a global concern for the Western economy? What would happen, in my view, is Russia would have dominated Eastern Europe and probably most of Western Europe. Who knows if it would have risen or collapsed? In Asia in particular, I think North Korea would have been a fucking nightmare. Yeah, I don't think the Europeans were powerful enough to resist Russia. They might have gotten
Soviets would have just kept marching west.
Yes.
I don't know if they would have had enough strength to be honest.
They could have.
They would have taken over Germany. Germany would have fallen.
Okay, East Germany. Okay, they take West Germany. I thought you were saying
they take Germany, and the next logical step from that, if the United States isn't involved, is a conflict between then larger Russia and France, because they were still competing for the same resources.
I don't think that's what I'm saying though. I don't think the Soviets would have taken that. I don't think they would have.
I got to inject. I got to inject here really bad because in 1948 there was a war study commissioned by George Marshall, which was Secretary of State at the time, just to see like between all the intelligence that we had, what was the actual viability. That if a war came down to the East and the West, basically at that point, who was going to win, what was going to happen, what was just the figurative estimates, even with the United States and something on the order of 30 atom bombs. Remind you, these are not the thermonuclear weapons that we'd have later. It was assumed that we would lose all of Europe, that outside of the UK, because the Russians had 5 million troops in uniform stationed throughout Eastern Europe against our like 2. It literally was expected to be one of the biggest blowouts in military history. That's why we were so scared that even without that, we had to enact the Marshall Plan because we didn't think that we could just remotely compete in a military engagement post World War II, and basically
the Marshall Plan is different. But I will say though that I think our intelligence agencies, it seems pretty clear now, overestimated the threat of the Soviets. I mean, they over and over again played them up as a bigger threat. I mean, the system collapsed. I mean, they constantly talked about, oh, if we don't do this, the Soviet economic system will overtake the Western economic system. That we know that would never have happened. That wasn't going to happen. It was the Soviets.
I think hindsight's 2020 here. So for instance, I think you can look back at history. Okay, well, and it's okay that they were wrong. But I'm just saying, there's a certain level of intuitive logic for me that if you're so busy redistributing capital that you basically don't create capital in the first place, and as a result, once you're constantly penalizing economic activity, you're going to have less economic activity compared to a more laissez-faire system. That to me is relatively intuitive, and then it's not surprising to me that a command economy collapsed. But I'm also benefiting from historical hindsight. But there was a book that was released. It was called Ugly Americans. I think it was released in the 1970s or 1980s. And what it talked about was the ineptitude of American diplomatic staff throughout Southeast Asia. It was like a novel, but it was basically describing how they believe that Russian diplomats were trained to know the language, know the culture, integrate themselves, be courteous, be this, be that, because they had a whole bunch of public funding, whereas the ugly Americans just hung out with the elites, stayed in the ambassador consulships, hung out with the rich people, and didn't give a fuck about the people. And as a result, not only did they fail diplomatically, but they also failed socially. And so what the novel was about an American couple actually going out into the countryside and using entrepreneurialism and observation and all of these things that we associate with American free thought in order to improve the lives of locals, and as a result winning the favor of the locals. And obviously this is a novel, it's written in the 70s, blah blah blah, but I think what you can infer from that was the fact that Americans were legitimately afraid that they were less competent than a publicly trained, publicly subsidized Russian superstate, and also that a command economy, while not as diverse and beautiful as a free market, if it was geared towards war and diplomacy, that it would actually be a better martial competitor than the Americans that tolerate hippies and free speech and black people and shit. So that's kind of, all I'm really saying is there were legitimate fears.
I think that when we talk about Soviet influence, at least in my opinion, I think one of the reasons the Soviets were able to have so much international influence was their support for various anti-colonial liberation movements. I mean, the Soviets backed the ANC way before the U.S. did. The Soviets backed, so many of these, countries that were gaining their independence at the time. It was you had communist movements in all of those countries backing the anti-colonial. Now, maybe you didn't like the economic stuff they were doing, but they were on the right side of that particular question of independence. And because of that, the Soviets were able to gain a greater foothold. So because of our support for all of these different, these dwindling actual colonial powers, they were able to get more support of the.
I have an objection here. Yeah. Sorry.
I just want to make that. I just want to make this clear because there was a point I was getting to. Even with hindsight being 2020, and actually the data that we knew all the way up until about 1956, we know that the Soviets, with the data that we have, even by the Soviet records, we would have got fucking rolled in Europe. We absolutely had we had the edge when it came to the Pacific. We had the air power, we had the naval power, but when it came to actual on the ground units, and particularly when it came to the Air Force within Europe, it didn't really start balancing out until the late 50s. And of course, at that point, you're starting to talk about tactical nuclear weapons and strategic nukes throughout the theater. And there was a, I'll put it this way. In the event that actually World War III, quote unquote, broke out anytime between 1945 and 1955, it would have been very, very real, and we would have lost.
Well, and can I voice my objection really quick? So, for instance, there's things that we did morally incorrect that had a good outcome. I think South Korea is the best example of that, where the people that we were supporting were basically authoritarian dickheads. And now you look at South Korea, North Korea, clearly the proof is in the pudding. Same thing with, I'm trying to think of another example. I mean, like Kuwait, not as bad, but basically Kuwait versus Iraq, obviously it would have been taken over and would have been fucked for the past like 30 or 40 years. But the point being that like just because you do malevolent shit during these, Chiang Kai-shek in China, that was the other one. Look at Chiang Kai-shek and look at the CCP, and I think there's an argument to be made that like the China would have been better off under Chiang Kai-shek.
I mean, Chiang Kai-shek was like arguably like at least saddling the line, like just literal fascism. And we can say that the CCP maybe is also saddling that line, but I think that we're just talking about.
Yeah, I would actually say that. I would say that the authoritarianism of Mao, in particular, his successors, the liberalization of capitalist rotors, and now this like hybrid state capitalist, whatever fucking monster that we're dealing with, I would say it's more monstrous than most of what Chiang Kai-shek could have accomplished, for sure.
I think that's a big question mark. But I think with Korea, I think when we say Korea is better, I would say better for who? Not North Koreans. What we did during the Korean War to North Korea, undeniably, it is not better for North Koreans. And I think that with South Korea, we have to say why is South Korea so prosperous today? I don't think it's because we bombed North Korea so much that we literally ran out of targets. I don't think that's why South Korea is where it is today.
Yeah, but is it because we defended them to the point that the North Koreans fucked off? Like you could have done that without bombing North Korea back to the fucking Stone Age. But I'm saying, like, is it because we defended South Korea?
That's the thing, the likelihood of political liberalization in South Korea, I think, that idea, like the unification of Korea, I think would have led to the totality of the population gaining political liberalization faster, because a lot of the repression.
If you had just let the North steamroll the South.
Well, that's the thing, that like a lot. When we think of the North today, the North that is the product of the Korean War, where what was the figure you gave before? Like 20 to 30% of the population literally got like wiped out. That does something to a population, having like an approaching genocidal conflict. That does something in the system. Like arguably one of the reasons Kim Jong-un is so repressive is because they don't want to be overthrown by the West. They fear that threat. I think you see the same thing in Vietnam. I didn't like a lot of stuff the Viet Cong did. That didn't stop us.
So what's your explanation for China then? Because we've never taken them over territorially unless you can consider the century of humiliation.
I guess I'm confused on what you're asking.
Well, what I'm saying is like this feels like Chomsky logic, where it's like, oh, people are shitbags, but they're shitbags because of America.
That's the thing. It's not because of America. That's the thing. If you're only looking at it through an American-centric lens, I think maybe you could have that question. But the thing is China has absolutely been impacted by colonial powers or like imperialist powers. I think Japan during World War II is the pretty clear example of that. What Japan did to that population, it's going to have a lasting effect. No, there's a reason the U.S. is so domestically liberalized, because we weren't impacted by World War or frankly any domestic war since the War of 1812. I guess the Civil War.
Okay, so I guess my real question is, how are you squaring that these places would have liberalized if you didn't take them on militarily, and then you also look at China that hasn't basically been taken on in a military way for probably, I don't know, 50 years. I think the normalization of relations was in like 1974 or something like that, and they liberalized economically, but they haven't liberalized socially at all.
Yeah, I agree. They have. I don't think that the struggle for political liberation, I think it's not. There's no like shortcuts to that. I think it happens like gradually over time. But I guess.
Yeah, but but what's to say, because we're presenting the world in hypotheticals and alternatives. Who's to say that we wouldn't just have the CCP all over the communist countries?
But just
like in authoritarian. Sorry, go ahead.
But look at all how close is Saudi Arabia to becoming a monarchy? To becoming a democracy.
It'd be a lot closer if it wasn't propped up.
Yeah, it's a fucking. It's a theocracy. What do you want? Well, like for that, like I also set expectations for people based off of their history and culture.
That's what I'm saying. I don't think it's a matter of like the U.S. backing militarily that's stopping these countries from either becoming or not. Like that's the thing. If that were true, we wouldn't be backing the majority of the world's dictatorships, but we do.
Yeah, because they're. I'm memeing again, but because they're brown and black, we don't care.
Oh my god!
Wait, but
I'm serious. I'm serious on some level.
There's a level where I get that, but it's just like, damn it.
That is a dodge point, though. If you're saying like, it is still a dictatorship, and you're like, oh, they didn't become a dictatorship. Like, I agree. Like they didn't become a democracy, but I'm saying that like the U.S. like like if the argument is the dictators we back just always turn into democracies, that's obviously just not true. Like that's something. If that is your proposition,
if we want to look at it like seriously, like
obviously,
I think you could look at. I think you. Sorry, go ahead.
The only two examples that I want to. There's a reason people bring them up.
Hey, quick question, guys. I watched a lot of the Slicker discourse. I'm gonna need $250 from all of you.
God
Really,
damn it. He's
really fucking
He's
hard.
crying.
You're
With the
interrupting,
latest-
bro. Come on.
I'll pay it back. I promise.
Okay,
We'll get back to the memes here.
He doesn't know the memes. Everybody here doesn't know the memes.
I want to take on this point because I feel like it's serious. So I think you're right that America backs and maintains dictatorships as long as it's convenient for them. I think that you could look at like the Iranian Shah in particular. I think you could look at Saudi Arabia in particular. I think you could look at the death squads. I think you could look at Pinochet. I think you could look at all these things. But then what I would say does seem to happen is through our professed ideology of liberalism and tolerance and syncreticity and the free market and blah, 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 is that these ideas, even with dictatorships, tends to bleed through. Like they do have McDonald's and fucking KFC and all sorts of weird shit in fucking Kuwait and Saudi Arabia now. They do have some level of the free market. They do have this, that, like this, that, the other, like so the market liberalization is coming. And then they also are having some levels of social progress on the dictatorship front where we are pressuring them about the death penalty. We are pressuring them about women's rights. We are pressuring them about this, about that. Maybe it's like too little too late or not enough to care or it's symbolic. But I think that's better compared to if we had like the CCP hegemony. They would basically say, why would you liberalize? Don't give up power. Here's some software in order to do facial ID shit.
It's easier than that. 1 second. Let me get in here 1 second. It's easier than that. Right? For all of Americans talk of isolationism, if you go to fucking Joe Average and you're like, hey, we're going to coup some people. We are going to do it. Right? We're going to cause some suffering in I don't give a fuckistan, right? But if we do, your gas is going to be $2 a gallon cheaper and your avocados are going to be $1 less a pound, right? For all of this calculation, if you dug down deep down in the American people and were like full isolationist, we're not going to coup anybody ever again, your quality of life is going to drop 20%. They'd be like, you better coup him. You better do it.
But Peacecraft, we weren't even getting into that yet, though. You're like this. If you weren't, I don't think you were paying attention to anything that we were talking about. Of course, I was. Kind of like an that's an interruption. I don't.
I'm listening.
But I think we are kind of like survivors. Okay.
Just one thing. We can't separate our support of dictatorships, especially in the Middle East, from the oil interest that exists there. When we started to back other countries in the area, specifically Israel, that triggered a global oil and energy recession that immensely impacted the United States politically and economically. We had not a lost decade, but pretty damn close to that. And after they flexed their muscles, after OPEC flexed its muscles, that's when we started to hey, okay, we're gonna back away. We're not gonna try to force pressure you or force you to do anything. We'll take a slow, methodical pace. Please keep the oil flowing. And they're like, okay, cool. And then that's when they turned the oil flow back on. So that's something I think that everybody is
that legitimate, or do you think that we strong armed them behind the scenes?
I think that's legitimate. I think that's legitimately what happened because.
You think it's both? You think OPEC actually flexed nuts and we were like, okay, bros, what do you want?
Yes. I do think that happened to a degree, and I also think that once we had a bigger enemy with Iran after the Shah was deposed,
revolution,
then we had the confluence of interest align, and that let the Kuwait the Gulf states off the hook. So I think that it needs to be said. That's all I wanted to put out there because everybody's
like, for example, Gaddafi was very involved with like the creation of OPEC, and obviously it was more of like we just like kind of waited to overthrow it. Like, it just wasn't instantaneous that they're like, oh, they're flexing their muscles a little bit. And then
Gaddafi also did terrorism across go on. It's not fun.
Wait, wait. Oh wait, I don't support Gaddafi.
I know. I'm saying that his you can't separate that from him either.
The same way that we waited for an opportune time to kill Saddam is the same way we waited for an opportune time to kill Gaddafi. 100%.
If you're conspiratorial, though, it's because you wanted to go back to the gold standard.
Yeah, well,
back it with that gold, baby.
I don't want to get into that. That's so dumb. It's not even.
I think it's way more than that. The gold. I've heard the gold thing about Libya. I don't think it's that. But wait, I want to get back to that point about like democracy, because I feel like there's this like survivorship bias. Like when we talk about like, oh, China didn't become like a democracy even though they like had this communism. Like in like
hey,
forget the
thanks
Middle
for
East.
the
Let's talk
raid,
about Latin America.
Canadian.
Like
Appreciate
there
you.
were like democracies there that were going in a left-wing direction. The U.S. overthrew them, and like Chile is a perfect example. People are like, oh yeah, the U.S. supported Pinochet, but they're a democracy today, so I guess it was good. But it's like they were already a democracy. We installed the dictator. Like it doesn't like count.
It was the wrong one. It was the wrong democracy.
It was the wrong democracy. I mean, that's the thing.
Yeah.
Is that
Well, actually, so this does get into like a thing. Like I'm not a Democrat. Like I'm not somebody who just believes in like there's inherent moral virtue to 51% of the population voting for something. Democracy killed fucking Socrates. Direct democracy probably destroyed Greece. Like democracy fucking sucks at some level. I'm a Republican.
Talking about like countries being aggressed upon by outside powers. I'm sure that you don't support that, right? Or at least in some capacity.
Well, I mean, I'm very smart, so I'm a real politic kind of guy. And I'm being fucking sarcastic here.
I know.
No. Okay. So at the end of the day, if you're asking myself, like, is it cool that we paid a bunch of fucking coked out fucking rural farmers who had a bunch of gripes with the government to go execute communist school teachers in their beds in the middle of the night so we could delay like leftist influence in South America? No, that wasn't cool to fucking do. I'm sure that you could probably like. My problem though is when you start going down the crimes in these places of like torture, rape, and murder. At some point, like you just lose yourself in the fucking sauce of kind of what just happens here. Like if you're talking about what the government does, or if you're talking about what rebels do, or anything like that, it just seems like some of these places are just fucked up. So then it kind of becomes a question of like
they are because
again.
They are, I mean, these places are like
more than me.
I don't think you give them enough agency.
No.
I think some of these places were fucked.
Hold on, Peacecraft.
No meme.
Yeah.
All right, Peacecraft, no memes, go.
Like, due to a Monroe Doctrine standard coming off the end of the World War II, as the hegemon, and due to geopolitical interest, America will have no rival on our landmass. If Canada got too froggy, we would come up with a way to fuck them up, right? Like, we want these countries, and I'm not talking moral. This is not a moral argument. In a realpolitik sense, we want their shit for cheap. We want their raw materials for cheap, the cheapest prices fucking possible. We want to brain drain the shit out of them, and we want to be king of the castle on our side of the pond.
Yeah, but can we be better than that? This is actually where I find myself. You're kind of low, Carl. Sorry.
Oh,
good.
I mean, that's not good. Like you can say like, yes, that is what has been happening since the beginning of the Monroe Doctrine. I would say that that's bad though, and we shouldn't be doing that.
We will continue to do it as long as it benefits the American people.
No, Peacecraft, this is some fucking doobie shit.
It's okay for Russia to invade Ukraine because there's fear of influence.
Yeah, because of realpolitik.
Might?
So hold on, Peacecraft, hold the fuck up. So this is actually where I'm memeing like fucking Peacecraft, and that's my bad. Now that we actually have Peacecraft in the room, I realize I have to be more clear with my fucking words. What I actually think is that if you look at the 20th century or if you look at the 19th century, I think people were making decisions based off of the information that they had, and just like every person throughout history, they thought they were justified in doing so. If you look at these situations with 2020, I think you can still make some of these justifications, even with the benefit of hindsight. If you were talking about now, what I think the world should be like now, I do think that having voluntary associations when it comes to liberal democracy, mixed economy, capitalism, trade relations, military training, military equipment, all that kind of stuff, Voluntary is 10,000 times better than involuntary. And not only that, we could probably achieve the geostrategic goals of the United States better if we were more soft power than hard power, and if we married the two into a softer hybrid. There's this part of the military that I really like a lot. It's called foreign internal defense. It's where you actually just take a dozen Americans and you have them train the locals. I think that should be the standard. Is we should pair countries that want to work with us with technologies that will actually work with their current systems, and also have Americans train them how to fight, and then let them develop their own security and their own markets and their own, kind of tax base and culture and all that kind of
I don't disagree with you, Connor. I don't disagree with you, Connor. Unfortunately, and this is where I'll throw the lefties a bone, we are not like China. We do not think on 10-year time frames or 20-year time frames. We think in fucking quarterly reports. Unironically, you would give the isolationists and the nationalists the quality of life they want if South America wasn't gutter fucked from Peru to Tijuana, right? If the individuals were driven and invested in their nations, creating competent goods for high trade in the American market, right? And we fucking had a solidified and united Americas. Sure, 100% agree with you. You get that in 50 years. You don't get if 50 years. You don't get that in 1 year. And due to that fact, we will never have it. In regards to your remark about Russia, if Russia truly wishes to be a hegemon and sovereign, then yes, they can exert their will on other nations. That is that for them not good. It's a litmus test. It's an acid test. You either got the sauce or you don't, and they don't got the fucking sauce, right? They don't have the sauce because we are the hegemon, right? Now, China, as you've accurately described, has been trying to take a more mutualistic aspect on it, but in the countries that they're trying it, like Africa, they're like, oh, this is the IMF, but in Chinese characters. Oh, shit. And I would bet you $5 today that within 30 years, similar to how Latin American nations wanted to go through and seize the fruit companies or seize the American businesses and nationalize them for their benefit, if Africa tries that shit, we will absolutely see Chinese boats off the Ivory Coast. Do you agree or disagree?
I disagree because I don't think they have the assets to do that at this time. I agree in the general consensus that China will protect its interests by any means necessary. But that's kind of where we're landing. I want to hear from y'all. But if I was to summarize the conversation a little bit from my end, I think it's interesting to engage in like a retrospective of history, and also to kind of compare what we all know about different parts of history: Osama bin Laden, Russia, Ukraine, Europe, World War II, all that kind of stuff. And I think it's okay to speculate on that stuff because the moral projections we put out onto the past are the moral projections we'll put out onto the future as well. But if no memes, if Carl was to ask me, hey, do you think the American empire is doing a good job? Or do you think we can do a better job? Like the answer is no, I don't think we're doing a good job, and we could do a lot better of a job that kills less people, that destroys less treasure, that destroys less cultures, that's less fucked up, that's a little bit less racist. I think we could do a lot better of a job. And then the reason why I kind of jump into the dark memes or whatever is because, one, I know the history, and then two, I know a lot of people don't give a fuck about the same shit that I give a fuck about. So we're probably going to have some pretty bloody fuck ups in the next half century, unfortunately.
Well, I think that kind of gets into, I mean, if the question was kind of posed at the beginning as, do you support American empire? No. But do I recognize that as a simple reality of the U.S. being basically untouched after World War II, it was going to become an empire. That was just going to happen. Was the U.S. ever going to leave Western Europe? No, that was not going to happen. And so, but there were certain things that I don't think were inevitable. The U.S. didn't have to invade Iraq. The U.S. didn't have to engage in as many regime change opportunities as it did. I don't think we had to go into Vietnam, despite what some people think. And so, on the margins, if that's where the debates are happening, I'm happy to have the debates there. But I have no delusion that there's going to be no empires, in the next 20 years or something like that.
Fair enough.
I want to defend freedom here for a minute, aka United States, in the regard that one of the things that I really do look at in history is that even the shittiest people that we really sided with. The majority of the time that we supported the dictators, that we supported the people that were really unsavory characters, is that a lot of them eventually went a way that we really do like. Just a couple examples here. The Republic of China, which a lot of people agreed that Chiang Kai-shek was like a closeted fascist or really close to it, is now a functioning liberal democracy. You have Portugal, you have Spain, you have South Korea, and even Chile was able to revert back, even with us pushing them in the wrong direction. I will openly say that I think we made a mistake in that we didn't support some of these democracies, even when they made some of the decisions that we didn't like. I think the world would be a lot better of a place if Iran wasn't flipped on its head and we had installed the Shah. But when it comes down to it, is that if you look at the places that I'll put it this way: if you look at the places that our antithesis supported, whether it be the Soviets or the Chinese, and then look at what America supported, is that pretty much everybody across the board, outside of like 2 exceptions, have done significantly better under the American aegis than any alternative.
I'll state definitively, American empire based. And we don't even do it with force 99% of the time. You got kids in Africa with Coke bottles for flip-flops, and yet they know how to sing along to Elsa's Frozen. You know what I mean? Our strongest American imperial psyops tool is turning the frickin' frogs gay through the power of Hollywood. When you talk about the things that we are exporting, when Duganist and Fluid Russia talk about why they hate the West so much, it's literally Hollywood. Our soft power has fucking conquered fucking places before they even knew it, because they wanted to have that delicious Big Mac in their mouth before we even landed boats.
If people like watching U.S. movies and listening to
Carl,
U.S.
he's memeing. He's memeing
No,
so hard.
No, dead ass. I'm dead ass.
He's being serious.
And sorry,
really
Let him respond, Peacecraft. Jesus.
I wasn't finished.
there are people that really do think like that, and that's the thing. Like nobody's talking about like the hegemony of U.S. like Hollywood culture. Like that, that's fine. I think that's I like it.
And in places where we have used force, the liberal order, the democratic order that we support and wish to propagate, is much more ethical, and even at its worst, has led to less loss of human life than our fucking competitors.
It definitely hasn't. I mean,
I wouldn't agree with that necessarily, because we don't support liberal order everywhere. Like we gotta be honest.
Yeah, Indonesia is a perfect example. We backed Suharto's overthrow Sukarno, and then the atrocities that took place. Something's like over 1 million people killed, a genocide in East Timor. I mean, it's just undeniable. And I think kind of what
actually. Sorry, I was going to say either Indonesia or Malaysia is actually one of the most egregious things of the West looking the other way I've ever heard of. I think it was like a few 100,000 people. And also, like, the people that they were killing, too, it was like, oh, you looked at a communist and smiled at them, so we're going to drag you out to the woods and execute you. It was fucking bad.
It was genocide masquerading as political.
So the one quibble I would say is there is a difference between something like an Operation Enduring Freedom or something that goes through the House, the Senate, the President, and has the will of the American people. And then we've got the cocaine cowboys at the Coup Immediately Always Foundation fucking running black ops that our fucking senators don't know about. And there was this one guy, I think his name was AFK or KFC or something like that. I think he said he wanted to scatter the CIA to the four winds, and then he got a lobotomy like his fucking sister from a bell tower, all right? So if you want to critique the fucking CIA, we can.
Right? Yeah, but that wasn't just the CIA, though. This was American interest not getting involved or turning a blind eye or giving tacit support through these things. The Shah wasn't just the CIA. The Shah was backed by Congress and the president as well. Like, you can't just say everything that is bad that America has ever done has been a product of the CIA.
I just became an expert. I just pulled up the Wikipedia for United States involvement in regime change, and like Vosh, became an expert. And everything I'm saying about Indonesia is the OSS to the CIA, right? In no point was the president, the House.
I think Connor's right. You are like Doobie.
Yeah. He's white Doobie.
Wait. All right. I don't know where we're going here, but like Carl was actually saying something a moment ago that I didn't want him to finish.
I apologize. Coming in heated to defend the red, white, and blue because these colors don't fucking run, baby.
Did he say the red, white, and blue?
Yes.
Yep.
Oh god. Okay.
I think it's complicated. I think when we say that we always back the moral side, I don't think that's true. I won't go as far as to say in most cases, but I think it's pretty easy to find many cases where we are just not supporting the most moral side. And like I said, we're talking about Indonesia, and yeah, that's true. They were killing just anyone that had any sort of affiliation whatsoever to communism. They were killing.
Yeah.
In El Salvador, I mean, they were literally dragging out priests that were like just preaching peace and stuff, and just murdering them all on our like in El Salvador specifically. The forces we were back were responsible for something like 90% of the civilian deaths. Well, the opposition, the FMLN, was responsible for like 10%, and the 10% is not good. But we were overwhelmingly supporting the more egregious, more authoritarian side in that conflict, and I think that's true in a lot of the cases. Because when we talk about, you brought up like Chile, and you brought up, frankly, Latin America in general. A lot of the support, positive movements Latin America has made was because of the pink tide, when it was breaking away from the U.S. kind of hegemonic interests. And we saw in Brazil, for example, under Lula. Mm-hmm. I mean, millions of people lifted out of poverty under the Workers' Party government, rather than the Brazilian dictatorship that we backed before that.
I'm actually kind of confused about this moral argument thing. Maybe I'm missing something because I don't see. There might be a moralistic percentage of the calculus that's being done, but I don't think we make decisions based on morals.
Well, I actually want to address this specifically. So I think that there's a certain amount of American redistributivism or economic redistributivism that we'll tolerate in the places that we want to have influence. You can have a certain level of education, certain level of social infrastructure, certain level of this, certain level of that. But once you start saying the word socialism or communism or whatever, we get real squirrely and real assassination-y real fucking quick. And I think that if you look at the 20th century in particular, even if you were like a Bernie Sanders type in South or Central America, even if you were like a social democrat, there's a small but real chance that the United States will a cocaine-fueled guerrilla force to come shoot you in the middle of the night. This is kind of the thing is, when we're talking about morality, we also have to talk about outcome. If these things had gone as far left, and for me, what I think happens is when you concentrate so much wealth and so much power into the government, typically through leftist institutional stuff, you basically arrive at fascism anyways. And then the other way that you can arrive at, because of the concentration of power, then when it comes to the right wing or whatever, I think that they can do things like Pinochet, where they're so afraid of leftism that they just create fascism as well. So the point kind of being that these killings and murders and all that kind of shit, just so we don't have to dig into the past too much. The question is whether or not we're intelligent enough and have enough information now that we can say, we want the average Brazilian, South American, Central American citizen to do well, but we also want to sway our influence. And the calculus that I did earlier, where it's like, are they brown? Do they have resources? Do they not have resources? Are they black? Do they have resources? Do they not have resources? Okay, they're black. How many resources do they have? I mean, that's a joke, but I also think it's real to a certain extent that we don't view these people as people, either because they're a few thousand miles away, so we can abstract away our own bullshit, or because they have a culture that's separate from ours, so we view them as more barbaric. So yeah, I'm admitting to all the horrors that Carl is talking about. I just think we disagree on whether or not the alternative was better or whether or not we had the moral capacity to be better in the past.
And reading on this literature, the OSS and CIA's reason to go into Indonesia at the point is because they were literally being scouted by the Soviet Union for nuke storage on their island. So toss your moralities aside. You're the president, or you're the director of the CIA. And the Soviet Union wants to stage ICBMs in Indonesia to have closer range to American population. Do you burn that place to the ground to protect your citizens?
No. That's a false choice. That's an entirely false choice.
Would the Soviets have been justified in burning down Turkey because we had nuclear weapons pointed at them in there? I mean, I think that logic.
Possible.
The difference is the power. If Russia had the power to do so, they would have done so.
But you don't. That's not the only. So you are following this whole. If you have the power, the strength to do so, dominate, because that's the. I don't know. I don't want to put words.
I'm
in
not
your mouth.
making.
It's for a
I'm
reason.
not making. I'm not making a moral prescription with this. I'm making a observation that due to the unique
but the
role
observation
of the
has
hegemon,
implications. So when you say, "Hey, this is why they did that," you're implying that that was one of the only alternatives. That's why I'm coming out and being like, "No, there's other alternatives to this. We could have done a huge diplomatic mission. We could have done we could have implemented economic hitmen, 10, 20 years earlier and gone through and taken them over that way, or just, hey, here's a fuck ton of money, Marshall Plan, like don't kill people, join us, and then buy them off. Like we had the ability to do these things. We chose to go the easier route that would have kept them weak and docile for a few decades, just because that's what.
Yeah, and kill a few 100,000 people. That violence is on a spectrum. It's not a binary choice.
Right here in the quoted thing, in 1965, the Atomic Energy Association was actively negotiating nuclear research with China. By 1970, they'd have their own reactors. They were actively seeking nuclear weapons from China. As the hegemon, as the big daddy with the stick, rightly or wrongly, we have the power to curtail that action if we so deem it. Right? If other nations have that power, they will act in the same manner. I am making the claim that power is best held in our hands because our normative action is better than other individuals' normative action. We can.
Wait, I'm sorry, guys. I've got a nuke in here for a second. This actually apparently dropped about 2 hours ago. There was a Biden interview on 60 Minutes. He has openly now stated that in the event that China would invade Taiwan, the United States will send forces.
Good.
Jesus fucking Christ.
He confirmed that the
Why would he say that? Why would he even say that though?
Because that's been our position for the last 60 years.
Yeah, but having a position and saying it out loud though is two different things.
No, well, this is going to derail. I'm going to stop.
No, like I wanted this to kind of be that final section before we wrap up, but I want Carl to go, and then I want to kind of wrap up the conversation that me and Cypher had on China earlier.
Okay.
Wait. I want to ask a quick clarifying question before I get my take. Wait, did he say we will send troops, or we'll just do what we're doing in Ukraine?
All right, so this is literally the headline from 60 Minutes. If you want to dig into it, definitely feel free. Biden tells 60 Minutes U.S. troops would defend Taiwan, but White House says it is not official U.S. policy. So make what that what you will, but that pretty much is openly just like
based. Love it.
Listen here, Jack. Me and Corn Pop back in the day. We'll defend the place. Taiwan's was a good restaurant. We'll defend it.
Okay, yeah.
That's it. I'm putting my pin on. Fuck y'all.
I think that's terrible. We're cripple the global economy. Millions of people, tens of millions of people would die, and it would greatly increase the risk of nuclear war. And I'm sure we'll get into it more, but that's my initial take.
That's fine. Well, we usually go for 2 hours, and I actually need to wrap this up here in just a moment anyway. But me and Cypher had a wonderful conversation over on his show, Cypher State. Where we talked largely about the interactions of China and where they are. So you can definitely check that out on my channel. That'll be live here in about a week. Or you can just go over to Crowdsource Politics and check it out over there, which is live now. But one of the things that we definitely were talking about was the United States and how our relationship is interactive with Taiwan. And we actually kind of talked about, hey, would the United States defend Taiwan outright, because it's been kind of a nebulous policy. Today, I openly said that the United States' relationship with China has openly got to the point of hostility, because earlier this week, the United States openly banned aircraft sales. We are now seeing cancellations of flights between the United States and China. The people who said the Cold War isn't coming, I'm going to say it's really getting warm. So, yeah. Anyway,
Cold War. That is World War III. That's not even a Cold War. That is World War III.
It's not World War III.
U.S. and Chinese hitting each other in the field.
China's not in the position right now to do anything, which is why Biden's probably saying what he's saying.
Well, that's different. If you're saying it's not going to happen, I'm saying if it does happen, Chinese troops and U.S. troops.
I'm saying that it's not going to happen, and that's why I'm not worried.
Dude, I dusted off the flak jacket.
Hold up. So I was gonna say there's actually a really good logistics video where China is trying to show off its maritime capacity, but they actually did an estimate on what they're actually capable of fielding, like contested and uncontested, and their contested technology is like almost none. Like their amphibious assault capacity is none. As a matter of fact, they were kind of wargaming whether or not they would be using civilian ships in order to transfer troops to Taiwan. So right now, just to kind of describe this a little bit, I'll be brief though. Like the United States, we have aircraft carriers, we have amphibious assault carriers, we have landing craft, we have basically like the giant airboats. I forget what the fuck they're called, but and then we also have LTVs and ATVs and all this kind of random shit that you can basically land troops onto the ground in order to do amphibious assaults. And we've been practicing that through Marine Expeditionary Units for the past 100 years. At this point, China they have the technology, but they only have one or two of each thing. They haven't built enough of them to actually do it, and it doesn't look like they're working up the capacity to do it.
Yeah, like Connor said, man, they got ATVs, BTVs, whatever. The only thing I'm going to need is fucking MTV, because I'm going to be blasting Creedence Clearwater Revival in that Huey fucking gunship at the defense of fucking brave Taiwan, all right? No, again, this is making my point. America, as the hegemon, can call another nation's bluff. And we can do it because we know we outstrip them in power. Unless they've been building fucking Hunt for October submarines this whole time. No, China can say some shit, and we can go, listen here, Jack. No. What the fuck are they going to do?
We're about, I think we got to wrap it up because I have like a whole, I have like a whole debate thing right here. So unless you want to get into another 30 minutes of it, I think we're going to call it.
Yeah, I'm down to bang.
We don't have 30 minutes.
No, I'm old as fuck.
I would love to go another hour. I can't make that work, and I know most of you have some other schedules. All right, so let's give this an outro real quick. First and foremost, Carl, thank you for being here. I've had a lot of fun. I hope you have too. I hope we can bring you back outside of the memes. We didn't scare you off there, but sometimes this place can go to the cats. But I hope you've had a fun time. Pussy? Yes. Anyway.
I'm sorry.
Anyway, if you want to give yourself an outro first as a special guest tonight, you are very welcome to do so.
Of course, guys. Thanks for watching. This was a great conversation. I hope to talk to each and every one of you again sometime soon.
I'll definitely be inviting you on my show. I just sent you a request.
Oh, good deal. All right. Awesome. We'll talk.
All right, fantastic. For anyone who doesn't know, check him out definitely on TikTok with that 114,000 followers. Help him get to 115,000. You can definitely do it over there. Next is our good friend Counterpoints, aka Connor. It's good to see you, sir. You've been spicy today. It's been fun, but it's good to see you.
You know what? I hung out with right wingers for too fucking long, and their spice fucking rubbed off on me. That's what happened. I don't know, man.
Dude, is Lauren as cute in real life?
She's not bad looking, I'll tell you that.
Hey.
So the point being, I'm pretty much center right. I'm a Marine Corps law enforcement veteran. I love Warhammer 40,000, so 95% of my views are based off of that, like reviews of those animations. But I also do political debates, and we're thinking about doing like a hippy dippy panel show relaunch. Lots of crazy shit. So there's always crazy content on the channel, and if I meme too close to the sun, it's just because I talk to crazy people all the time. So I'm happy to be here and get it all out, and looking forward to the next one.
All right, it's been great to have you, Connor. Next, CSB Cypher. You can check him out on Crowdsource Politics, both on Twitch and YouTube. Definitely go give him a follow and a sub. Go show him your love. It's good to see you here, sir.
Hey, no problem, man. This was a great show. Thank you for introducing me to, again, another wonderful person. Carl, this conversation was great. I'm sure that we agree more than we disagree, which is why I want to talk to you some more. So, like I said, I sent you a friend request. Connor, I wouldn't worry about the memes that you laid tonight too much. I know you can get clip-chimped with it, but, they actually made the point that you were trying to make, so I wouldn't be worried about it.
Okay, based.
All right, next, Osiris the PC Pimp. You've been a little quiet tonight, but I know that this isn't the things that you usually talk about.
Boring.
But it is so good to see you either way, my friend, and I hope you're doing well.
Always doing well, and I'm extremely disappointed in all the historical, intelligent, academic talk about the world We're Americans. We don't give a fuck about the world. Exert American hard power, soft power, and all the in between power. Okay.
All
Let's
right.
have fun.
Well, definitely. All right. So just to make you feel better, if we do the show next week and if everything goes the way that we would like to, we can get into the Destiny thing. We can do the crap.
Yeah. Well, I didn't even talk about the assault on a free speech. Destiny getting banned is an assault on all our freedoms. Okay.
So yeah, we'll probably have a little bit of something delayed, but we can probably do that next week if everything works out. Next is Peacecraft. Thank you for jumping in and bringing in the spice, but also coming back to the ground level and engaging with us as we like.
Tiberius, always a masterclass in panel hosting, saving the best for last of the outros. I am Peacecraft, the white doobie, as one might say. I love my mom, I love racism, and I hate leftism. And hopefully you will give these nice people here your money. I am not a streamer because I'm not narcissistic enough to be a fucking streamer. You're not going to find me on TikTok because you're not going to find me on TikTok because that is a Chinese spy Zoomer app for the developmentally disabled. And I'm glad that we were able to have that representation on the panel today. Other than that, you can find me here. You can find me here. It is a Chinese spy app. Let's be real.
It is, but the other stuff is no. Come on.
Like our TikTok things, I will be currently dancing at a hospital surrounded by COVID patients, doing my part. And you can find me here on Tiberius's channel. Maybe you might even see me on the Crucible here soon enough if I want to get extra zesty. And other than that, you can find me shitting up Twitch chats and spamming probably bigotry in all caps. And with that, I'll sign off.
All right, thanks for being here. And of course, I'm Tiberius D. If you're not familiar with me, watching on these wonderful other people, I talk geopolitics. As you can tell, I have a few credentials that I'm able to throw out. I can't talk today. Connor must have screwed me up really, really bad. I blame you, sir. It's all your fault. God damn you. But when it comes down to it, I absolutely love doing what I do. I like to talk about what's going on in the wider world, but I'm also a massive nerd. I'm trying to schedule a conversation with Connor of doing a review on a particular thing. I can't remember what it was. Maybe you can remind me.
Breaking Bad.
Quick. Yes. I'm hoping that we can do a review over the series Breaking Bad as part of my Tiberius review series. So if anything that we have talked about tonight or that interests you whatsoever, definitely come check me out. Twitch and YouTube and TikTok and almost all those things you can find me on. So without further ado, this is the end of the Mascot Podcast for Sunday, the 18th of September. We'll catch you very, very soon. Until next time, take care.
Bye, guys.
All right, we offline now. Connor, you're gonna buy the 40K. You're gonna buy the 40K decks, Connor?
Oh, hold on. I'm gonna sign out real quick, so I'm gonna deafen myself.
I got 67 people to.
All right, everybody. That was the Mask Off podcast with Tiberius D. If you liked it, please be sure to go ahead and give Tiberius D a follow. He's good people, does a lot of good work with foreign policy and foreign affairs and the like. With that, we had him on our show today on Cypher State, which is the Foreign Affairs Foreign Policy cast, and we talked about China with everything that's going on. We're sure going to be to talk about it again just soon. So if this is kind of stuff that you like, be sure to check out our channel. Go ahead and like, subscribe, share us with your friends, and as always, as we say, Cloud Source Politics, keep your head up through the political storm.
Power to defeat